Alrighty, guys. So we supposedly got this 8K filing that says they got the dilution vote. Couple things I'm gonna say about it. This isn't gonna be my full take on it. I feel like what needs to be said probably is not best said in a video and is probably better said in a write-up. And I feel like this is something I need to write up. First off, if you just add up all the numbers real quick, the 480 million outstanding shares they said were able to vote, the Series A and C warrants that they had, which add up to about 9 million, and then you look at the dilution vote, it would appear that, so if you didn't vote, your vote was a no. Anyone saying anything different is completely an idiot. Obviously, if you signed a proxy and you didn't vote, then you're giving them the right to vote for you, but as long as you didn't sign that proxy, then your vote was a no. So if you just take all the votes and you look at what voted for, and then you look at what didn't vote for, and you just subtract the difference, it would appear that they had 248 million votes vote for the dilution, and there was 241 million votes against dilution. Now, that difference of 8 million votes means that it only takes 4 million to flip one side for it to be a no vote. So 1% of the vote is what gave them the yes vote. Now, there's a couple things that I want to say real quick. First off, everything in my body, every bone in my body tells me the squeeze is still on. I'm not worried. I don't know. I'm really not. And if you go to my last video where I talk about the dilution, like, there's just a couple things. First thing, let's just look at it from this perspective. So May 13th, there's 332 million shares outstanding. June 9th, they announced as of June 2nd that there's 477 million shares outstanding. If you look at June 2nd, we had a decent amount of volume. If you go past that, from June 2nd to June 9th, up until we got the announcement that there will be a vote and that the record date was June 2nd, and that David Mickery gave himself a bunch of shares from the authorized shares at no cost, what you'll see, like the way that this looks, is that they diluted, they beat us down from $4.18 all the way down to 78 cents, and retail bought the dip. I'm sure retail was slowly buying the dip all the way through that drop. But what they realized was that retail was buying the dip, and they came up with what seems like an emergency plan. So right at the time where they saw the number of shares that were being bought versus the number of shares that they have remaining to dilute, they shot themselves a bunch of shares. They then came out on June 9th and said record day, only people that owned as of June 2nd. And they put themselves in a situation to win the vote by 1%. Now, if you watch my last video, I talked about how that kind of action to then go on, and so to take these shares and give yourself the right to vote and control the outcome of the ownership of the company, and then to go and immediately dilute those shares and lose all the vested interests you had in the company, but only after you postponed or backdated only after they backdated the record date of ownership for the shares to vote. So look at it from this perspective. If on June 2nd they can look at the share count and realize if they had this many shares, they can win the vote by a hair. And then June 9th comes around and they're like, oh crap, in the last week, we just diluted this many shares and now we can't win the vote. Well, we got to go and backdate this to June 2nd to where we can win the vote. So for them to basically, retail owns the company, right? We know that May 13th, retail owns at least 80-90% of the company with the 332 million shares outstanding. For them to backdate this record date and not give the owners of the company the heads up of when the record date is gonna be, because every other time that I've ever seen this happen, they say this is the record date. Anyone that doesn't buy in the next 3 weeks will not have the right to vote on the upcoming voting. Well, they didn't do that here. What they did here is they announced it on June 9th, and they said anyone that didn't own by June 2nd doesn't get a vote. And so that tells me, that tells me that's a hardcore scam. And I'm 99% sure that is not standard operating procedure within publicly traded companies and votes. The whole idea behind taking on all these shares so that you can have the vote and then immediately diluting them to stop the squeeze for the next 2 months and removing your vested interest but still holding the voting power. Again, it may not be illegal to the point of putting someone in jail, but it is 1000%, like, just put yourself in the shoes of a jury. If you saw a company do that and take away the ownership of the people that actually own the company through a messed up vote, like, the jury decides innocent and guilty. It's not some written law. There is no written law for this kind of stuff. This has never happened before. And so, again, I feel like all this needs to be written up clearly. And hopefully I'm capable of doing that. I might need some editors to help me out with it. But I'm just going to write something up and then post it out there. And if people can help with it, great. The last thing that I'll say is that, again, I do feel like this was illegal in the eyes of a jury. I feel like this is the easiest lawsuit in the world to win of all time, ever. And that's probably the #1 reason why I think the squeeze is still on. Did they give themselves the shares? Maybe. Did they win the dilution vote? Maybe. Could we potentially do a preliminary injunction in the next couple weeks and get this in the courts? Maybe. But the way that I'm looking at this is, if they know that they got those shares backhandedly and they know that it wouldn't look good in the courts, then the only way that it technically damaged us, monetarily damaged us, is if we don't get the squeeze. But if we still get the squeeze, if they let it squeeze and they let retail play this out, after we finish the first 500 million shares, potentially 558 million shares of dilution, then they can come back and say, oh, where's retail's damages? Retail doesn't have damages. Now, I personally feel like even if the squeeze happens, that retail would still have damages because we owned the company and they took that ownership away. And I think the ownership of the company and the intellectual property and everything that MULN is potentially more valuable than the squeeze that is going to come. And so in my mind, I could easily see them letting this squeeze after we finish whatever dilution is left of the original authorized share count. And then after the squeeze, like after it's hit a high and it starts trading sideways, then I would expect them to start using their dilution. And that way they can try to cover as, well, retail wasn't injured. Yeah, so I guess the last thing that I'll say is, if you aren't like we've had 2.1 billion shares traded since the last dilution announcement. This is the longest amount of weeks and days that have passed of market trading days that they have not announced a dilution announcement. The 2.1 billion shares is up there for the most shares traded without an announcement as well. And if I were you, I'm in options and there's no getting out of my options. And if I get more money, I'm probably going to buy more options until I see how this plays out. I'm infinite bull. Nothing's going to stop this. I'm convinced that, the whole world just saw what happened, people. There's a lot of people that weren't for the squeeze. A lot of people that knew it was about to squeeze and weren't for it and didn't invest in it and probably tried to convince others not to because they know it hurts the system. And the only thing they want in this world is to keep the system going that made them rich and wealthy and secure and stable. But they still, in the AMC squeeze, when they were doing this same garbage, hedge funds were jumping out on Twitter saying, "This is unbelievable. I just bought 10 million shares, or $10 million worth of shares." There were hedge funds all over the place buying 50,000 shares at a time. And they were tweeting about it, saying this is an outrage and an injustice. Well, if they think that way, how hard will it be to get a freaking expert to get on a stand and tell a jury that this has never been seen before and the worst thing ever? And so the point is I think the squeeze is on. I think you should hold until the next dilution announcement, at least a week after the next dilution announcement. If the dilution announcement comes and retail only bought 10 million shares and authorized shares is only at 490 million, maybe the FUD campaign worked. Maybe we're not going to get to the 558 million that we'd have to guarantee a squeeze. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think they'll use this dilution to stop the squeeze. Even if they got the dilution, I don't think they'll use it to stop the squeeze. And if they did, the justice you would get in the court system would be unbelievable. And if you're not willing to see this to the end, well, you probably don't deserve money. And I guess it's just that simple. I'm going to see this to the end.